In the lunar city of Gravitas, where dreams came to die in a vacuum and hope was as scarce as breathable air, Darius Flint was doing what he did best, trying to make sense of a universe that insisted on making fools of them all. He was a miner by trade, leader by necessity, and cynic by choice. Today, he found himself in the middle of a sporting event that was about as entertaining as watching dust settle in low gravity. The game was something the miners called Moonball. It involved a lot of bouncing around in zero-G and occasional shouting. The rules were simple: outlast the other team without dying. It was a crowd favorite, mainly because it gave everyone an excuse to forget their daily grind and cheer for something equally pointless. "Hey, Flint, you see that catch?" yelled Gus, a fellow miner with a chin so sharp it could open cans. Darius leaned against the railing, arms crossed. "Yeah, Gus, I saw it. Looked like he was trying to hug a ghost." Gus chuckled, which sounded like rocks grinding together. "Better than watching you try to dance." "Hey, that was one time and I was drunk," Darius shot back, smirking. The crowd of miners was a ragtag bunch, their faces as lined and worn as their environment. They were laughing, shouting, occasionally shoving each other in excitement as they watched their favorite pastime. It was a slice of life in a city that took life and wrung it dry. Overseeing the chaos with an air of bureaucratic disinterest was Harquin, the alien envoy sent by their so-called overlords. He was tall, with skin that shimmered like an oil slick, and eyes that changed colors like a mood ring on a teenager. He stood at the edge of the court, observing with a curious tilt to his head. "Humans are peculiar," he mused, his voice smooth and unsettling, like butter on a hot skillet. Darius, overhearing, sidled up with a grin that could cut glass. "Yeah, we get that a lot, Harquin, so what's the verdict? You joining the team?" Harquin blinked, his eyes shifting to a deep purple which Darius assumed meant confusion or maybe indigestion. "Join. I fail to see the strategic value of such an endeavor," Darius shrugged. "That's 'cause you're looking for strategy in a sport where the main goal is not to break a leg." "Curious," Harquin muttered, jotting down notes on a device that looked far too advanced for a place where duct tape was a form of currency. As the game progressed, Harquin's interest seemed to grow, which was the first sign things were about to go sideways. The second sign was the look of horror on the face of a miner who'd taken a particularly hard bounce off the court wall. He staggered up, waving his arms like a conductor in a symphony of panic. "They're coming! They're coming!" he yelled, pointing towards the sky. The crowd's laughter died faster than a cheap battery in a winter blizzard. Heads turned upwards, eyes squinting against the harsh lights of Gravitas' dome, searching for the they in question. "Any idea who they are this time?" Gus asked, scratching his chin with grease-stained fingers. Darius sighed. "Could be anyone, space pirates, tax collectors, or worse, space lawyers." The panic spread like oil on water as the miners began to scatter. Darius watched the chaos with a bemusement that came from years of dealing with the universe's bad sense of humor. "Great," he muttered to himself. "If there's one thing miners love, it's a good all-fashioned panic." Amidst the unfolding spectacle, Harquin turned to Darius, eyes now a disconcerting shade of orange. "Is this part of the event? A simulation of sorts?" Darius barked out a laugh. "Oh yeah, it's all part of the fun. Nothing gets the blood pumping like a good misunderstanding." Harquin nodded, apparently satisfied. "Ah, humans and their peculiar rituals." As the supposed threat drew closer, Darius made a decision, one that would probably rank alongside his other questionable life choices. He climbed onto a nearby crate, whistling sharply to get everyone's attention. "All right, listen up," he called, projecting his voice over the din. "Whatever's out there, I ain't letting it ruin my day. So let's keep calm, grab your gear, and try not to die in the process. Any questions?" A hand shot up in the crowd. "Yeah, what's the plan if they start shooting?" Darius grinned, a wolfish expression that was all teeth and no warmth. "Simple. We duck." The laughter that followed was nervous, but it was a start. Harquin, still observing, raised an eyebrow. Your species has a strange way of dealing with adversity. Welcome to Gravitas, Darius replied, jumping down from the crate. Where life's a game and the rules change every damn day. As the miners began to mobilize, collecting whatever passed for weapons and armor, Darius caught sight of Harquin still standing there, notebook in hand, watching with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing amoebas. You might want to find cover, Darius suggested. Just in case things get lively. Harquin inclined his head. I shall observe from a safe distance. And with that he floated gracefully to a nearby observation post, settling in as if he were about to watch a theater performance. Darius shook his head, muttering to himself as he joined the others. Aliens, man. They just don't get it. The miners were a motley crew, equipped with tools that were never intended for combat but would have to do. They lined up, ready to face whatever came their way with grim determination and a distinct lack of better options. Hey, Flint, Gus called, sidling up next to him with a wrench that looked more suitable for fixing plumbing than alien invaders. You think we'll make it? Darius shrugged, adjusting his grip on a particularly intimidating piece of mining equipment. Who knows? But I'm not keen on finding out the alternative. Gus nodded, squaring his shoulders. Guess it's a good day to not be dead, huh? Best day of the week, Darius agreed, eyes fixed on the sky. And so they stood, a defiant line of weary workers, ready to face whatever existential crisis was about to descend upon them. It was as if the universe had decided to give them a break from monotony by adding a touch of madness. Remember, Darius called to his crew, if you see something ugly, shoot it. If it shoots back, run faster. Laughter rippled through the ranks, a sound born of desperation and camaraderie. It was the laugh of those who had seen the worst and still found a way to joke about it. As the tension thickened like bad gravy, the sky above Gravitas finally revealed its cards. A fleet of alien ships cut through the darkness, their sleek forms glinting menacingly under the dome's artificial lights. Well, ain't they a sight? Gus muttered, eyes wide. Darius could only agree. They were a sight, all right. A sight that spoke of trouble in a language everyone understood. Harquin's voice crackled over the comms, his tone alarmingly calm. Darius, it appears there has been a grave misunderstanding. Darius snorted, keeping his eyes on the approaching ships. Can't imagine how that happened. The game, Harquin continued, was misinterpreted as a military exercise. Of course it was, Darius muttered, rolling his eyes. Why wouldn't a bunch of sweaty miners playing ball be mistaken for a military maneuver? I must rectify this, Harquin insisted, his voice tinged with something that might have been urgency if aliens had such emotions. You do that, Darius said, cracking his knuckles. In the meantime, we'll try not to get shot. The first ship hovered ominously above them, engines humming with the promise of chaos. And as the miners braced themselves for what came next, Darius couldn't help but chuckle darkly at the absurdity of it all. Just another day in paradise, he murmured to himself. Just another day in Gravitas. And with that, the universe, in its infinite wisdom, decided to roll the dice once more, leaving Darius Flint and his band of misfit miners to await the outcome with wry humor and steely resolve. Harquin's shimmering figure flickered in the dim glow of his private quarters, a modest room that resembled a hermit crab's shell made of questionable taste. He tapped furiously on his communication device, trying to make sense of the chaos he had just witnessed. The device chirped in response, and the holographic visage of his superior, an alien with an even more impressive set of mood-ring eyes, appeared before him. Harquin, said the superior in a voice that sounded like crushed velvet in need of ironing. Report. Harquin hesitated, his eyes cycling through a kaleidoscope of colors as he tried to articulate the bizarre turn of events. It appears we have misinterpreted a human recreational activity as a military exercise. The superior's eyes flashed a disapproving shade of crimson. Explain. It was a game, Harquin said, each word a struggle as he fought the urge to laugh at the absurdity of it all. Moonball, they call it, involved zero-gravity maneuvers and much yelling. There was a pause, and Harquin could almost hear the gears turning in his superior's mind, each one well-oiled and thoroughly unimpressed. And the existential threat we detected, Harquin shifted uncomfortably. The shouting, sir. Humans can be quite exuberant. Exuberant, the superior repeated, as though sampling a new, unpalatable flavor of intergalactic cuisine. Very well, proceed with increased surveillance. We cannot afford any missteps. Understood, Harquin replied, cutting the connection. He breathed a sigh, the kind of sigh one might release after realizing one's epic tale of heroism was actually a comedy of errors. Back in Gravitas, Darius and his crew were busy playing a different sort of game, one that involved dodging alien drones that zipped around like massive mechanical mosquitoes on a mission. Anyone else feel like we're living under a microscope? Gus muttered, eyeing the buzzing contraptions with a mix of irritation and paranoia. Welcome to the future, Darius replied, hefting his mining tool like a medieval knight might brandish a sword. Where Big Brother has 8 legs and glows in the dark. The team had gathered in Darius's makeshift hub, a storage room that doubled as an office and smelled faintly of burnt coffee and desperation. The walls were plastered with crude maps of the Lunar city, annotated with colorful curses and arrows pointing to areas of interest or, more accurately, danger. We can't keep playing along, one miner piped up, scratching his stubbled chin. They're watching our every move, Darius nodded, leaning against a stack of crates that had "Trust me, I quote him" fragile scrawled across them. We need to be smarter than the average alien, Gus snorted. Considering they're watching us, that's a pretty low bar. Exactly, Darius replied with a grin that suggested he was either very confident or very stupid, possibly both. We'll use their own curiosity against them. How? Asked another miner through a mouthful of something unidentifiable that might have once been food. We give him a show, Darius said, his eyes gleaming with the kind of mischief that usually prefaced bad decisions. Let's see how they handle a bit of human theater. And so began Operation Red Herring, a plan that involved a lot of shouting, waving of arms, and strategically placed pyrotechnics. If the aliens wanted to watch, well, Darius and his crew would make damn sure they had something to see. The following day, Harquin observed from his post as the miners engaged in what could only be described as a performance art piece devised by someone who had never heard of subtlety. There were smoke bombs, flares, and at one point, some rather impressive interpretive dance that involved a lot of lunging and twirling. Are they always this expressive? Harquin queried, his eyes a thoughtful shade of teal. Only when they're up to something, Gus replied, sidling up beside Harquin with a conspiratorial wink. You should see them during the holidays. Harquin's device hummed with incoming transmissions from his increasingly perplexed superiors. They seem agitated. That's the spirit, said Darius, appearing with a flourish that would have put an interstellar magician to shame. Nothing like a little chaos to keep folks on their toes. Harquin regarded Darius with a blend of admiration and exasperation. You humans are quite the enigma. That's one way to put it, Darius replied, crossing his arms. But don't worry, we won't bite. Unless, of course, you're made of chocolate. The miners continued their spectacle, drawing an audience of curious aliens who hovered around like tourists at a bizarre cultural festival. The tension in Gravitas shifted from apprehensive to bemused, as if the city itself had decided to take a break from its usual existential dread. Meanwhile, Harquin's comm device buzzed with frantic updates from his superiors, who were struggling to interpret the miners' antics as anything but insanity. The more they watched, the less they understood, which was precisely the miners' intent. So, what's the verdict? Gus asked, watching as another drone whizzed by, attempting to capture every angle of the ongoing lunacy. Darius shrugged. If nothing else, we've given them something to talk about. Harquin joined them, his expression one of conflicted amusement. Your tactics are unconventional. We prefer creative, Darius replied with a wink. And maybe it'll make them think twice before sending in a fleet. Who wants to invade a place full of lunatics? Harquin considered this, his eyes a contemplative green. There is a certain logic to your madness. That's the spirit, Gus said, clapping Harquin on the shoulder with a grease-stained hand. Now you're thinking like a miner. As the sun set over Gravitas, an event less about celestial bodies and more about the shifting glow of artificial lights, the miners gathered to celebrate their victory, such as it was. Beer was passed around and jokes were swapped with the kind of camaraderie that only comes from shared adversity. So, think they'll back off? One miner asked, raising his drink in a mock toast to the alien drone still hovering above. Maybe, Darius replied, leaning back with the satisfaction of a job questionably done. Or maybe they'll just send more observers. Great, more fans, Gus said, rolling his eyes. We'll have to start charging admission. Amid the laughter and light-hearted banter, Harquin remained, a silent observer of a species both baffling and intriguing. The miner's resilience, tempered with humor and a touch of madness, was something his people had yet to fully understand. As the night wore on, Harquin found himself alone with Darius, the other miners having staggered off to their quarters or collapsed where they sat. The quiet between them was comfortable, like an old, worn-out jacket that still fit just right. "So, what's next for you?" Darius asked, his voice low and thoughtful, as if he were discussing the weather or the likelihood of rain on a planet where it never rained. Harquin considered the question, his eyes flickering through a spectrum of colors that suggested deep contemplation. "I will report what I have observed and hope it brings clarity rather than confusion." "Good luck with that," Darius said with a chuckle, raising his can in salute. "Aliens probably see us like a bad sitcom, ridiculous and oddly compelling." Harquin nodded, his expression one of tentative agreement. "There is much to learn from your kind, and much to unlearn," Darius quipped, stretching his arms overhead in a gesture of mock triumph. "We're a complicated bunch. But if you stick around, you'll either love us or leave us scratching your head." As the artificial stars twinkled above Gravitas, Harquin realized that, despite the chaos and confusion, he'd found something valuable among the miners, a glimpse into the heart of humanity, with all its strange and wonderful contradictions. Darius clapped a hand on Harquin's shoulder, the gesture surprisingly reassuring. "Welcome to the madhouse, Harquin, where nothing makes sense and that's just how we like it." And as Harquin watched the drunken revelry continue, a small, wry smile spread across his face. Perhaps in the end, that was what made humans so fascinating. They embraced their chaos, turned it into something uniquely their own, and somehow, someway, found a way to flourish amidst the madness. In the distance, another drone buzzed by, its sensors capturing the scene for alien eyes that would never fully grasp the nuances of human existence. But for Harquin, that night in Gravitas marked the beginning of an understanding, a first step in bridging the gap between two worlds, and perhaps, just perhaps, a new chapter in the story of humanity's place among the stars. As the night wore on, the digital hum of Harquin's comm device faded into the background, forgotten in the face of shared laughter and camaraderie. It was a sound that signified neither threat nor safety, but rather the persistent, unyielding curiosity of a universe that refused to be neatly defined. And with that, the night in Gravitas drew to a close, leaving behind a memory etched into the hearts of those who had witnessed it, a memory of a night where differences were set aside, and the dance of life continued unabated amidst the stars. The sun, or whatever passed for it on Gravitas, had barely broken the horizon when the latest round of alien-inspired insanity hit. Harquin rolled out of his hermit crab-like quarters, the walls closing in with the kind of oppressive comfort only a government-issued dwelling could provide, just in time for his comm device to blare with the velvet-coated voice of his superior. "Harquin, the miners' activities are escalating. We must clamp down." The voice purred with the menace of a cat toying with a particularly slow mouse. Harquin sighed, a sound that had become his unofficial theme tune, and acknowledged his orders. Understood, Superior. I'll implement increased restrictions on their operations immediately. Back on the ground, or what passed for it in a zero-G environment, Darius Flint was already 2 steps ahead. As usual, his eyes narrowed against the buzzing drones that seemed to multiply overnight. Gravitas was starting to feel like an intergalactic fishbowl, and he was the goldfish being poked by an army of bored 5-year-olds. Anyone else feel like we're about to be put on a leash? Gus grumbled, his paranoia hitting a new high. We're already on the leash, Darius corrected, tapping his worn-out boots on the metallic floor for emphasis. We're just pretending it's a fashion statement. The miners muttered their agreement, the air thick with a bitter cocktail of frustration and determination. As the alien overseers began to limit their every move, even their beloved moonball games were reduced to quiet skirmishes in the shadows. Into this dismal mix entered Kalia Riggs, a tech-savvy spark of rebellion with a knack for mischief, and a heart as irreverent as her wild, untamed hair. She plopped down beside Darius with a grin that suggested she just had an idea that would either get them all killed or make life a hell of a lot more interesting. Darius, you ever think about the power of sports? Kalia asked, eyes alight with mischief. Darius arched an eyebrow, the universal sign for you're crazy, but I'm intrigued. I think about a lot of things, but sports aren't usually on the list. Why? Kalia leaned in, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. What if we use outdated sports footage to send a message? Show them humans aren't a threat, just a bunch of nutters playing with balls for fun, Gus snorted. You think that'll work? They'll just think we're more insane than they already do. That's the beauty of it, Kalia countered, her grin widening. They'll see the chaos, the camaraderie, and maybe, just maybe, they'll realize we're not worth the trouble. Or they'll send us a therapist, Darius added dryly. But hell, it's worth a shot. As the restrictive measures tightened around them like a noose, Darius and Kalia set to work. The miners rallied, their enthusiasm reignited by the prospect of a plan that didn't involve outright rebellion, or at least not one that would get them vaporized. Kalia's quarters looked like a mad scientist's workshop, wires snaking across the floor like the aftermath of a robotic spaghetti explosion. Old sports footage flickered on a battered screen, relics from a time when Earth wasn't a distant memory. Football, rugby, even synchronized swimming, each more baffling than the last when stripped of context. You sure this'll work? Darius asked, staring at a particularly violent game of rugby that made zero-G look like child's play. Kalia adjusted a tangle of wires with a practiced flick. It's a long shot, but it's better than doing nothing. Doing nothing's my second favorite plan, Darius admitted. But I'll admit, this one's growing on me. Over the next few days, Gravitas became a hive of clandestine activity. The miners were a relentless force, working under the watchful, unblinking eyes of the drones. Every move was calculated, every risk weighed against the potentially disastrous consequences of being found out. Harquin, meanwhile, was having a crisis of his own, his mood-ring eyes a constant swirl of indecision. He'd always believed in understanding before action, but the miners' antics were testing the limits of alien patience. Why do they persist in such bizarre displays? Harquin muttered to himself, observing the humans with both fascination and exasperation. His superior's latest orders were clear: increased surveillance, reduced freedom, an iron grip on the miners' activities. It was a recipe for disaster, one Harquin could see brewing beneath the surface of Gravitas like a pressure cooker ready to blow. The time arrived for Darius and Kalia's masterpiece of human diplomacy. The miners gathered in the makeshift hub, the air buzzing with anticipation and the kind of nervous energy usually reserved for last-minute wedding vows or diffusing bombs. The message was simple, if a little unorthodox. Clips of sports games layered with a voiceover Kalia insisted on providing herself. She'd watched one too many motivational videos, and it showed. The plan was to hijack the alien drone's transmission feeds, a feat that required both daring and a complete disregard for personal safety. It was risky, like juggling live grenades while tap dancing, but if anyone could pull it off, it was their ragtag team of misfits. "All right, everyone ready?" Darius asked, his voice carrying a confidence that belied the madness of their plan. "Ready as we'll ever be," Gus replied, his smile tinged with the kind of grim humor that came from knowing you were about to do something incredibly stupid. Kalia hit play, and the screens came alive with a riot of color and motion. The aliens, they hoped, would see the truth behind the chaos. Humans weren't a threat, just an unpredictable bunch who played games that made war look like a tea party. In Harquin's quarters, the comm device buzzed to life, the screen flickering with images of humans in mid-flight, tumbling like leaves in a storm. He watched, bemused and slightly alarmed as the montage unfolded, athletes leaping, tackling, and diving with reckless abandon. "This is unexpected," Harquin murmured, his eyes a thoughtful shade of amber. His superior's voice soon joined the chorus, a velvet purr laced with curiosity. "What do they hope to achieve with this display?" "Understanding, I think," Harquin replied, his voice tinged with something akin to admiration. "They're showing us who they are." The transmission played out, a chaotic symphony of movement and sound that defied easy interpretation. But for the miners, it was a message, a statement of intent that spoke louder than words ever could. As the last clip faded, Darius turned to his crew, his expression one of cautious optimism. "Well, they wanted a show. Let's hope they got the message." Back in his quarters, Harquin pondered the miners' latest move, his heart a mix of hope and trepidation. There was a beauty in their madness, a defiance that spoke of resilience and spirit. And as the artificial stars once again took their place in the cold sky of Gravitas, Harquin found himself wondering if perhaps, just perhaps, the humans had succeeded in their quest for peace, not through diplomacy or force, but through a chaotic, exhilarating celebration of life in all its unpredictable glory. The night wore on, leaving behind the echoes of laughter and camaraderie. The miners' message had been sent, the outcome uncertain, but for now they had done what they did best, embraced the chaos and turned it into something uniquely their own. In the silence that followed, Harquin knew he had witnessed something extraordinary, a glimpse into the heart of humanity, with all its strange and wonderful contradictions. And maybe, just maybe, it was enough. Gravitas was a place where hope went to die. Not that hope was ever particularly welcome there. It wasn't exactly the kind of place you'd bring a date unless your intention was to leave her for dead. The miners knew this. Hell, they'd practically invented self-pity as a recreational sport. But even they had to admit, things had taken a turn for the worse. The plan, the beautifully reckless plan, had backfired spectacularly. Like the time Gus tried to make moonshine out of reprocessed fuel, except with fewer explosions and more existential dread. The alien overseers, those all-seeing, all-misinterpreting overlords, had taken one look at the sport's footage and concluded that humans were gearing up for some kind of interstellar brawl. "I swear," Darius grumbled, pacing the cramped confines of the makeshift hub, "you show them rugby and they think we're training for a war. I mean, have they even seen us? Half of us can't even run without wheezing." Kalia, who was busy fending off a particularly persistent drone with a spanner, scoffed. "They're probably scared we'll start throwing balls at them or something. Not our fault they can't tell a scrum from a skirmish." The drones were back, buzzing louder than ever, like mosquitoes on steroids. The aliens, in their infinite paranoia, had ramped up surveillance, and Darius felt like a rat in a very shiny, well-monitored trap. It was like living in a reality show, except the only prize was not getting vaporized. "Anyone else miss the days when the worst thing we had to worry about was running out of beer?" Gus asked, leaning against the wall with the languid grace of someone who'd resigned to their fate. "Beer," Darius mused, his voice rich with longing. "Now there's a dream worth dreaming." But dreams were in short supply on Gravitas. The air was thick with tension, the kind you could cut with a knife or a particularly sharp wit. The miners were antsy, their movements restricted to what little space the overseers deemed acceptable, and with the drones watching their every move, even the simplest task felt like a high-stakes gamble. "Maybe it's time to start digging our own graves," Darius muttered darkly, earning a few nervous laughs. Harquin, stuck in his hermit crab quarters, was having a day of it too. His mood had swung from mildly concerned to might as well start a blog about existential dread. The images of humans leaping and tackling haunted him, a vivid reminder that the universe was vast and filled with things he didn't understand. "Superior's not happy," he muttered to himself, the comm device buzzing with orders that left little to the imagination. More restrictions, heightened vigilance, it was all terribly predictable. "Harquin, report," came the familiar purr of his superior. "The latest transmission has been deemed a threat." "A threat?" Harquin echoed incredulously, his eyebrows in danger of launching off his forehead. "They were throwing balls, not grenades." "Different species, different perspectives," the superior replied, a note of reproach in his voice. "Maintain control, control." A laughable concept on gravitas, where the miners had about as much control over their fate as a fish in a frying pan. Harquin could almost hear the universe laughing at his predicament, a cosmic joke with him as the punchline. Back at the hub, Darius was rallying the troops, or at least trying to, between bouts of existential despair. It wasn't easy keeping spirits up when the universe was hell-bent on grinding you down. "We've got to stick together," he told the assembled miners, his voice firm despite the chaos swirling around them. "They can't watch us all the time. We'll find a way." "Yeah, until they decide we're better off as fertilizer," Gus quipped, earning a few grim chuckles. Kalia, ever the optimist, or perhaps just more stubborn than was healthy, refused to let the situation get the better of her. "We'll show them. We just have to get creative, that's all." "Oh sure," Darius shot back. "We'll just crochet them a sweater and hope they don't notice the plot to overthrow them woven into the fabric." The miners snickered, their laughter a defiant act against the oppressive atmosphere. But underneath the jokes lay a very real fear, a fear that their time was running out, that the next move might be their last. In his quarters, Harquin was wrestling with his own demons. He'd been tasked with enforcing the new restrictions, a job that made him about as popular as a slug in a salad. It was hard to maintain a facade of authority when you were outnumbered by people who could break you in half without breaking a sweat. "Just another day on the galactic frontier," he sighed, glancing at the comm device with a mixture of dread and resignation. The miners, meanwhile, were plotting their next move. It wasn't as if they had much choice: sit still and wait for the end, or do something stupid and hope for the best. It was a philosophy that had served them well, or at least hadn't gotten them killed yet. Darius gathered his crew in the hub, their faces lit by the feeble glow of the monitors. "All right, folks," he began, "we need a distraction, something big enough to make them forget about tightening the noose." "Like a circus," Kalia suggested, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "A circus," Darius echoed, a grin spreading across his face. "Why not? We can juggle, do some acrobatics, maybe even train Gus to jump through hoops." Gus flipped him the bird, but the idea took root, sparking a flurry of activity as the miners began to brainstorm. If the aliens thought they were unpredictable, they'd show them just how wild the human imagination could be. In the days that followed, the miners turned gravitas into a veritable circus, a chaotic blend of makeshift costumes, absurd stunts, and of course, a liberal sprinkling of sarcasm. It was a spectacle, a middle finger to the universe wrapped in humor and defiance. Harquin, tasked with documenting the miners' antics, found himself strangely captivated by their ingenuity. The circus was a madness he'd never encountered before, a testament to human resilience that defied logic and reason. "You have to admire them," he muttered to himself, watching from the sidelines as Darius attempted a daring high-wire act with a rope that looked like it had seen better days. The miners laughed, cheered, and occasionally fell flat on their faces, but they did it with style, their spirits buoyed by the sheer absurdity of it all. And for a brief moment, the oppressive weight of gravitas lifted, replaced by the simple joy of forgetting their troubles, if only for a while. But as the circus rolled on, tensions continued to simmer beneath the surface. The overseers watched with unblinking eyes, their paranoia ratcheting up with each passing day. Harquin could feel it, the pressure building like a storm on the horizon, ready to burst with the fury of 1,000 dissatisfied bureaucrats. Darius knew it too, the knowledge weighing heavy on his shoulders. They were running out of time, out of options, and the next move would have to be bold enough to turn the tide or foolish enough to end it all. "We've got one shot," he told his crew, his voice steady despite the turmoil churning inside him. "One last performance to show them what we're made of." Kalia nodded, her expression a mix of determination and reckless abandon. "Then let's give them a show they'll never forget." The miners set to work, their creativity unleashed in a final, desperate bid for freedom. It was a gamble, a long shot that might just be crazy enough to work, or more likely, get them all killed in a blaze of glory. As the final act approached, the atmosphere on Gravitas was electric with anticipation. Harquin watched from the shadows, his heart a jumble of emotions, fear, admiration, and a touch of envy for the human's unyielding spirit. Darius, standing at the center of the makeshift stage, took a deep breath and signaled for the show to begin. What followed was a whirlwind of color, noise, and chaos, a tribute to humanity's indomitable will to survive against all odds. There were stunts, jokes, and even a few heartfelt moments, all woven together in a tapestry of defiance. And as the final crescendo built, Darius looked out at the sea of faces, the miners who'd become his family in this God-forsaken place. "We've faced the worst," he shouted, "and we're still here. Let's show them what real courage looks like." The crowd roared in response, their voices echoing through the corridors of Gravitas, a rallying cry that reached even the most cynical of hearts. For a moment, it felt like anything was possible, like they could defy the odds and forge a future of their own making. But as the final notes faded, reality came crashing back with the force of a sledgehammer. The overseers, unmoved by the spectacle, tightened their grip, and the miners' hopes were dashed against the unforgiving rocks of bureaucracy. Yet in their hearts they knew they had tried, had fought with everything they had. And in that fight, they'd found something worth holding onto, a sense of identity, of purpose, even in the darkest of times. As the lights dimmed and the stage fell silent, Darius turned to his crew, his voice filled with a quiet resolve. "It ain't over yet," he said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Not as long as we're still kicking." And with that, the miners of Gravitas prepared to face whatever came next, armed with nothing but their wits, their grit, and a healthy dose of gallows humor. In the end, it was all they really needed. The bleak expanse of Gravitas stretched out before Darius like the universe's longest bad joke. Resources were tighter than a miser's purse strings, and alien patrols were prowling like buzzards on a fresh carcass. Darius, with his face set in a permanent scowl, was witnessing the miners' moral, mental, and, most importantly, physical frailty. It was enough to make a man want to lie down and let the cold embrace of space make all his decisions for him. "So, what's the plan, O great leader?" Gus asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He was perched on a crate like a gargoyle, clutching his homemade moonshine as if it were the Holy Grail. Darius rubbed the stubble on his chin, an unkempt beard he'd grown out of sheer defiance of alien regulations on facial hair. "Plan. I'm thinking we throw a we're so screwed party and hope the universe at least has the decency to bring a gift. Preferably one that explodes," Kalia chipped in, poking at a tangle of wires with a spanner. She was the kind of person who always looked like she knew something you didn't, which was infuriating because she probably did. Kalia, ever the tinkerer, had spent the better part of the last week poking around in the guts of their dilapidated power systems. Rumor had it she was trying to find a way to communicate with the alien overlords using nothing but a paperclip and her boundless disdain for authority. She had the look of a mad scientist, if mad scientists wore oil-stained overalls and had a penchant for setting things on fire. You know, if we could just send a message through all this cosmic garbage, she mused, maybe we could tell them we're not interested in being their pet monkeys. Or at least negotiate better snacks. Gus took a swig of his questionable brew, grimacing as if he just swallowed a small piece of the sun. Yeah, because intergalactic diplomacy is our strong suit, right after our skills in interpretive dance and tactful surrender. Darius chuckled, though it was more of a dry wheeze. Well, if anyone can do it, it's Kalia. She once turned a toaster into a shortwave radio just to listen to Earth's golden oldies. Desperate times, Darius, Kalia replied, not looking up from her work. Besides, I think alien overlords might appreciate a little Elvis in their lives. Meanwhile, Harquin was wrestling with an entirely different beast, a superior who had all the empathy of a block of granite and the patience to match. The comm device buzzed incessantly in his quarters, a constant reminder that he was expected to keep the miners in line, a task akin to herding cats through a minefield. Harquin, the superior's voice crackled through the device, as soothing as nails on a chalkboard. I trust you've got everything under control, as much as one can control the inevitable collapse of a dying star, Harquin replied, injecting just the right amount of sarcasm to hopefully go unnoticed. The miners are cooperative. Good. I expect no slip-ups, Harquin sighed, resisting the urge to throw the comm against the wall. Of course, superior. I'll keep you posted on their every breath. The miners were far from cooperative, but what could he do? He was one man, and even though he occasionally felt like an alien among humans, he shared their frustrations. They were stuck in this cosmic pit, with no hope of escape and a future as bleak as the landscape outside. With each passing day, the pressure on Darius grew. Leadership was a heavy crown, and his head was starting to ache from wearing it. Between the dwindling supplies, the restless miners, and the constant threat of alien intervention, he was starting to wonder if the universe was playing an elaborate joke at his expense. The hub was silent as the grave when Darius called a meeting. Miners shuffled in, their faces etched with exhaustion and the kind of resigned determination that suggested they'd keep fighting until their very last breath. They were a ragtag bunch, but they were his, and he'd be damned if he let them down without a fight. "All right, folks," Darius began, pacing before his audience like a comedian on the verge of bombing. "We need to come up with something. Kalia thinks she might have found a way to send messages through the black hole power systems." "Great," Gus deadpanned. "Now we just need a plan that doesn't end with us getting vaporized." Kalia, her hands stained with grease, stood up. "It's risky, sure, but if we can get a message out to the alien leaders, maybe, just maybe, we can convince them we're not worth the hassle." Silence followed her declaration, the kind that was more oppressive than comforting. The miners were a pragmatic bunch and they knew the odds, but they also knew that sitting on their hands wasn't an option. "Let's say we do this," Darius said slowly. "Let's say we actually manage to get a message through. What do we tell them? That we're just simple miners who'd rather not be included in their galactic empire's latest edition of What Not to Do with a Planet." Kalia shrugged. "Works for me." Darius saw Gus roll his eyes. "You know, if we're gonna go out, I'd rather it be with a bang than a whimper." "I'm with you," Darius said. "But maybe, just maybe, we can go out with neither." The miners were silent, waiting for their leader to offer up some miraculous plan, but Darius was fresh out of miracles. All he had left was grit and a stubborn refusal to go gently into that good night. He looked at his crew, the people who'd become his family in this bleak corner of the universe, and made a decision. "All right," he said, his voice firm. "We're going to do this. Kalia, work your magic. The rest of us, keep your heads down and your eyes open. We stick together, we keep moving, and maybe, just maybe, we'll come out of this in one piece." There were nods of agreement, murmurs of assent. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was hope, wrapped in a layer of cynicism and a dash of insanity. It was all they had. As the miners dispersed, Darius found himself alone with Kalia. She was still fiddling with her invention, a contraption that bore more resemblance to modern art than a communication device. She looked up, meeting his gaze with a mixture of determination and mischief. "You know this could all go horribly wrong," she said, her tone casual as if they were discussing the weather and not their potential demise. "Wouldn't be the first time," Darius replied, grinning despite himself. "But you know, if I had to choose a way to go, it'd be in a blaze of glory with you lot by my side." Kalia smirked, the gleam in her eyes suggesting she was already 2 steps ahead and halfway to something brilliant, or brilliantly stupid. "Well, let's make sure we go out with style." As Darius walked away, he realized he was smiling, a rare occurrence these days. Maybe it was the impending danger, the shared struggle, or the fact that when everything else was stripped away, all they had left was each other. Whatever it was, it felt good, a small spark of warmth in the cold void of Gravitas. Back in his quarters, Harquin was wrestling with his own demons. The orders were clear: keep the miners in line, maintain the status quo, avoid any incidents. But he was starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, the miners had the right idea. That maybe shaking things up was precisely what they needed. He glanced at the comm device, a symbol of everything he was supposed to represent. A chain around his neck, pulling him in a direction he wasn't sure he wanted to go. He thought about Darius, Kalia, and the rest, about their resilience, their humor, their refusal to be crushed under the heel of alien authority. It was madness, pure, unadulterated madness, but it was also beautiful in its own way. "Maybe I'm getting soft," Harquin muttered to himself, a wry smile playing on his lips. Meanwhile, in the depths of Gravitas, the miners were preparing for the next phase of their plan. It was a long shot, a gamble that might just pay off, or blow up in their faces. Kalia worked tirelessly, her hands a blur as she coaxed the communication device into something resembling functionality. Darius watched from the sidelines, his heart pounding with a mix of anxiety and hope. It was all or nothing, a roll of the dice that could change everything. "Ready?" he asked, his voice tight with tension. Kalia nodded, her expression focused, determined. "As I'll ever be." With a deep breath, she activated the device, sending a signal out into the void, a plea, a challenge, a declaration of independence. It was a beacon of defiance in the dark, a message that might just reach the alien overseers and convince them to let Gravitas go. Time seemed to stretch, each second an eternity as they waited for a response. Darius felt his heart pounding in his chest, each beat louder than the last. Then a crackle over the speakers, a voice, foreign yet unmistakably clear. "Humans," it said, dripping with disdain. "What is the meaning of this?" Kalia shot Darius a look, a mixture of triumph and trepidation. "Guess they got our message." "Now what?" Gus asked, his voice a mix of excitement and fear. "Now," Darius replied, steeling himself for what came next, "we give them a piece of our mind." In the depths of space, on a planet where hope had long since been buried beneath layers of rock and despair, the miners of Gravitas prepared to do something truly extraordinary. They were going to fight, not with weapons, but with words, wit, and the unyielding spirit that had kept them going through the darkest of times. It was their darkest hour, but it was also their finest. And as they took the first steps on this new path, they knew one thing for certain: they were not alone, not as long as they had each other, and that, in the end, was all they really needed. Darius Flint had always thought the universe had a sick sense of humor. Like a cosmic jester, it dangled hope just out of reach while giving you a kick in the shins. And here they were, trying to send a message through a black hole, a plan so fundamentally insane, it might just work. Kalia was hunched over the contraption, her fingers dancing over wires and circuits like a maestro conducting an orchestra of chaos. Her face was a roadmap of concentration, with a few detours into frustration. "You know, this feels like trying to build a spaceship with duct tape and dreams," she muttered. "Duct tape and dreams," Darius echoed, nodding sagely. "The unofficial motto of Gravitas. Gus snorted from his perch, taking a swig of his homemade moonshine, a beverage that tasted like pure regret. Wouldn't be so bad if the dreams didn't always turn into nightmares. But hey, at least the aliens don't drink this stuff. Yet, Kalia added, squinting at a particularly stubborn piece of tech, give them time. They might decide to confiscate it as a weapon of mass destruction. Darius chuckled, though the humor was starting to wear thin. They had a deadline, and the clock was ticking louder than a doomsday countdown. If they didn't get this right, their next interaction with the alien overlords would be less negotiation and more final farewell. "All right, what's the latest?" Darius asked, trying to keep the anxiety out of his voice. Kalia blew a stray lock of hair out of her face, her eyes still glued to the jumble of wires. "We're close, but it's like trying to thread a needle while riding a wild bull. One wrong move and this whole thing could blow up in our faces." "Wouldn't be the first time," Gus offered, ever the optimist. "True," Darius agreed. "But let's try to avoid fireworks this time. I'd like to keep my eyebrows, thank you very much." The room was quiet except for the occasional zap and crackle of Kalia's project. Each sound was a punctuation mark to their collective heartbeat, which seemed to be synchronizing with the malfunctioning circuit. "Ever think about what you'd do if we actually got out of here?" Gus asked, breaking the silence. Kalia paused, smirking. "First thing, find a planet with actual gravity. Second, get a real drink. One that doesn't taste like I'm committing a crime against my liver." Darius nodded, lost in thought. "For me, I'd like to see a sunset again. Not the simulation, but the real deal, with the colors and the warmth and none of the existential dread." They shared a moment of silence, each lost in their own fantasies of a world beyond the bleakness of gravitas. But reality was a persistent bastard, clawing them back to the here and now. Harquin, meanwhile, was dealing with his own cosmic joke, a superior who couldn't find empathy with a map and a compass. His comm device buzzed with the frequency of a particularly annoying insect, the kind that bites and leaves you itching for days. Harquin, the superior's voice grated through the device, devoid of pleasantries or any semblance of warmth. "Progress report." "Still monitoring," Harquin replied, injecting just enough enthusiasm to not sound suicidal. "The miners are being miners." "Good. Ensure they remain productive. Any deviation from protocol will be met with consequences." "Understood," Harquin said, resisting the urge to hurl the comm device out the nearest airlock. "We wouldn't want to upset the status quo." The superior signed off with all the grace of a hangman's noose, leaving Harquin to brood in the dim confines of his quarters. He found himself wondering, not for the first time, if he'd backed the wrong horse. The miners, for all their rebellious tendencies, had a point. They were fighting for their survival while he just punched a clock, metaphorically and literally. Back in the workshop, Kalia was hitting a wall. Not literally, although she'd come close a few times. The alien tech was a puzzle, one where the pieces kept changing shape just to spite her. "Anything?" Darius asked, trying not to sound desperate. Kalia shook her head, her frustration palpable. "I swear it's like these aliens didn't want us to hack their stuff. Rude, right? Downright inconsiderate," Gus chimed in, rolling his eyes. "You'd think they'd at least leave a manual," Darius sighed, staring at the tangled mess of wires and circuits. "We need something, anything. Maybe a common ground we can use to our advantage." "Like what?" Kalia asked. "It's not like they're broadcasting their favorite soap operas or anything." But then a thought struck her, a memory of alien broadcasts they'd intercepted. The aliens didn't do soap operas, but they did have broadcasts. Strange, cryptic messages that might hold the key. "Wait," she said, eyes lighting up with a mixture of hope and mischief. "Remember those alien broadcasts we picked up? They might be more than just surveillance. What if they are trying to communicate in their own way?" Darius blinked, processing the idea. "You think they're sending cultural references?" Kalia shrugged, grinning. "Worth a shot. If we can find something in their broadcast that resonates, we might be able to send a message they'll actually listen to." Gus raised an eyebrow. You're suggesting we try to make friends with the aliens through their own version of reality TV. Why not? Darius said, feeling a spark of hope. Could be our chance to connect on common ground. Let's figure it out. The team got to work, sifting through hours of alien broadcasts. It was tedious, mind-numbing work, but it was their best shot. Darius watched as Kalia toggled through the static and strange sounds, hoping for a revelation. Here, Kalia said suddenly, pointing at the screen. It's a broadcast from their central network. Looks like some kind of sports event. Darius squinted, trying to make sense of the alien figures darting across the screen. Looks like zero-G dodgeball on steroids. Exactly, Kalia said, her excitement contagious. What if we can use this to our advantage? Show them we're not so different. Get them to see us as well as players, not pawns, Gus snorted. Or at least as amusing enough not to kill. It was a long shot, a gamble with odds stacked higher than the asteroid mountains outside. But it was something. It was a glimmer of possibility in the dark. Kalia set to work, crafting a message with elements from the alien broadcasts. Every beep and buzz seemed to fall into place with a purpose, the device slowly morphing into the universe's most elaborate walkie-talkie. Darius watched, a mix of pride and anxiety welling up inside him. You sure this will work? Kalia shrugged, the weight of uncertainty apparent. Nope. But at least it'll be one hell of a show, Gus chuckled. If we're lucky, maybe they'll just laugh us off and leave us alone. Or they'll see us as worthy opponents, Darius added, the thought giving him a strange sense of hope. Finally, the contraption was ready. It buzzed with energy, a Frankenstein's monster of alien and human ingenuity. All right, Kalia said, handing Darius the makeshift control panel. You ready to send our "We come in peace" message? Darius took a deep breath, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Let's do it. Here's hoping they have a sense of humor. With a nod, Kalia activated the device. The message shot through space, carried on waves of uncertainty and defiance, a Hail Mary aimed at the stars. They waited, the tension in the room thicker than Gus's moonshine. Every second felt like an eternity, the silence pregnant with possibility. Then a response crackled through the speakers, a chorus of alien voices, surprisingly melodic. What do they say? Darius asked, his heart pounding. Kalia listened, her face a mix of concentration and disbelief. I think they are inviting us to a game or maybe a meeting. Hard to say. Gus grinned. Either way sounds like we didn't piss them off. That's a win in my book. It was a small victory, a step in the right direction. The miners of Gravitas had taken their shot, and it seemed to have hit home. They still had a long way to go, but for the first time, there was a glimmer of hope on the horizon. Darius looked around at his crew, his family, and felt something he hadn't in a long time, pride. They'd done the impossible, turned the universe's joke back on itself. All right, folks, he said, his voice steady with newfound conviction. Looks like we've got a game to win. Let's show these aliens what we've got. And with that, they set their sights on the stars, ready to face whatever came next. In the dimly lit belly of Gravitas, hope was an alien concept, often squashed under the boot of cosmic indifference. But today it was peeking out from behind its usual veil of cynicism, and even Darius Flint, notorious for his permanent scowl, sensed it. All right, kids, he began, rubbing his hands together as if they might spark some luck. We've got the aliens' attention. Now let's make sure they see us as the lovable, bumbling fools we are, rather than the next interstellar threat. Kalia leaned back in her chair, a half-smirk playing on her lips. Lovable fools, huh? Pretty sure Gus fits that description better than any of us. Gus, who'd been nursing a concoction that could probably power a small ship, raised his makeshift cup in mock salute. To being fools. Better than being dead, which were not so. Wynne, Harquin, who had joined them under the guise of maintaining surveillance, looked skeptically at the ragtag group. You do realize that if this doesn't work, the aliens might just decide to use us for target practice, right? Darius waved a dismissive hand. Oh, ye of little faith, we've got this. The universe might think it's playing a cruel joke, but guess what? We're the punchline. Right, Harquin said, deadpan. because jokes about impending doom always go down a treat. Kalia turned back to her array of screens, fingers flying over the controls like a pianist on a caffeine bender. The alien broadcast they'd intercepted had been dissected, analyzed, and now reassembled into something that might just pass for cultural exchange. "We've woven in some classic human sports moments," she explained. "The idea is to show them we're not prepping for war, just trying to not lose our minds in this floating tin can." Darius nodded, the weight of the task not lost on him. "Let's hope they have a sense of humor, or at least a sense of mercy. Or both," Gus added with a grin. "Wouldn't that be swell?" As they continued to tweak the message, Harquin's comm device buzzed again, the irritating whine of authority making itself known. "More bad news from your superior?" Gus asked, eyebrow quirking with curiosity and a touch of schadenfreude. "Possibly," Harquin replied, looking at the device as if it might grow fangs. "Or maybe they're just checking if I've developed Stockholm Syndrome yet." "Tell them you're too busy saving their bacon," Kalia quipped, eyes not leaving the screen. The message was ready. A carefully curated package of human culture, sports highlights, and the occasional blooper reel to show their less than ominous intentions. Kalia hit the send button with a flourish that suggested she was either very confident or just a little bit insane. They waited, breath collectively held as the signal shot through space like a paper airplane hurled in a hurricane. "How long do these things usually take?" Gus asked, eyeing the contraption as if it might explode or sprout wings and fly off. "Hard to say," Kalia replied, her voice tinged with sarcastic optimism. "Could be minutes, could be days, or maybe it'll just bounce back with a return to sender notice." Minutes stretched into an eternity, punctuated only by the intermittent buzzing of Harquin's comm device, which he was now actively ignoring. Finally, a reply crackled over their speakers, alien voices weaving together in a sound that was at once melodic and strangely unsettling. "What's the verdict?" Darius asked, his voice an odd mix of anticipation and dread. Kalia listened intently, her expression shifting from concentration to surprise. They actually laughed." "Is that good?" Harquin asked, fighting the urge to cross his fingers. "It's a start," Kalia answered, her grin widening. "They laughed and, hold on, they're retracting the heightened security measures." A collective sigh of relief coursed through the room, the tension collapsing like a house of cards in a vacuum. "Well, I'll be damned," Gus said, raising his drink in a triumphant toast. "Here's to not getting shot today." Darius couldn't help but chuckle, the weight of the universe momentarily lifting from his shoulders. "Seems the aliens have a soft spot for slapstick." "Who knew?" Harquin, ever the pragmatist, nodded. "Let's just hope this means they'll stop seeing us as the enemy and more as, well, harmless entertainment. Or at least as a curiosity not worth the trouble of extermination," Kalia added, closing her terminal with a satisfied click. With the immediate threat averted, the group allowed themselves a moment of respite, the oppressive air of gravitas feeling just a bit lighter. "So, what's next?" Gus asked, his voice carrying a hint of genuine curiosity. Darius leaned back, a rare smile playing on his lips. "Next, we keep doing what humans do best, survive, adapt, and maybe find a way to thrive. And drink," Gus added, raising his cup again with a wink. "Survive, adapt, thrive, and drink," Darius corrected, the words feeling strangely hopeful despite their grim surroundings. Harquin, watching the interplay with a newfound respect, felt something shift within him. Maybe he hadn't backed the wrong horse after all. Maybe these miners, with their stubborn resilience and dark humor, had the right idea. The universe might be a cosmic jester, but today it had tipped its hat to the miners of gravitas, and that was a victory worth savoring. As they sat in the glow of their small triumph, Darius knew the road ahead would be just as fraught with challenges, if not more. But for now they had a moment, a fleeting, fragile thing that felt like a lifeline in the vast expanse of uncertainty. "All right, team," he said, his voice steady with resolve. "Let's take what we've learned and keep pushing forward. We've shown the universe we're not so easily beaten. Now let's make sure it remembers. With renewed determination, they set about their tasks, the hum of activity returning to the workshop. In the face of cosmic odds, they would continue to defy, to challenge, and to laugh in the face of doom. And maybe, just maybe, they'd find a way to turn the universe's joke back on itself once more. Darius Flint rubbed his temples as he studied the holo display flickering in front of him. The dim light of gravitas did nothing to flatter the lines of stress etched into his face, but Darius preferred it that way. Keeps the expectations low, he thought wryly, at least from the outside. "All right, folks," he said, addressing his ragtag crew sprawled around the control room. "We've got the aliens on speed dial now, so let's use this newfound friendship to negotiate better working conditions." Gus, lounging on a crate that might have once held something important, raised a cup filled with his latest brew. The sickly green liquid bubbled ominously. "Cheers to the aliens. May their paranoia continue to work in our favor." Kalia snorted, her fingers dancing over the control panel as if conducting some cosmic orchestra. "You really think they'll go for it, Darius? I mean, we managed not to get vaporized, but convincing them to improve conditions. That's a different beast." Darius shrugged. "If you don't ask, you don't get. Besides, what have we got to lose? Our charming personalities." "Mostly yours," Harquin chimed in from his corner, eyes glued to his comm device. The thing had been silent for once, which was as close as Harquin got to a vacation. "All right, Harquin, keep your smoldering optimism in check," Darius shot back, his scowl softening into something that might have been mistaken for a smile by someone not paying attention. "Let's draft a proposal they can't refuse." Kalia pulled up a new document on her screen, and they began to hash out what they hoped to achieve. Improved rations, less invasive surveillance, maybe even some actual non-toxic recreational space. Hell, if they were feeling bold, they might even ask for a day off. Gus pointed at the list, his finger leaving a smudge of questionable origin. "And let's add more moonball games." "I mean, if we're going to be seen as harmless idiots, might as well lean into it." "More games could mean more misinterpretation," Harquin cautioned, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely against the idea. "But it could also mean more goodwill." "Goodwill's overrated," Darius muttered, though they all knew he was on board. "But let's give it a shot." "What's the worst that could happen?" Kalia tapped away, her half-smirk a constant companion. "If they humor us, we might just see gravitas become a beacon of interspecies cooperation." "Careful, you're starting to sound like you actually believe in this place," Harquin said, unable to keep the smirk off his own face. They sent the proposal through, using the same jerry-rigged contraption that had saved their skins the first time around. As they watched the signal disappear into the ether, Darius leaned back, the chair creaking ominously under his weight. "Now we wait," he said, trying for patience but landing closer to resignation. "Seems to be a theme these days." "Waiting's what we do best," Gus declared, taking a swig from his cup and wincing as if he just swallowed a live grenade. "And drinking. We're damn good at drinking." Iors drifted by, marked only by the occasional buzz of Harquin's comm device and Gus's increasingly slurred anecdotes about past failed distillations. Just as the monotony threatened to lull them into a collective stupor, the speakers crackled to life, signaling a reply. Kalia perked up, fingers poised over the controls. "Here we go. Let's see if we're getting a nice try or a please stop sending us your weird human requests." Darius leaned forward, every muscle tense. "Give it to us straight, Kalia." Her eyes scanned the incoming message, and for a moment her expression was unreadable. Then slowly, incredulously, she grinned. "You're not going to believe this. They've agreed, mostly." A cheer erupted from the group, loud enough to rattle the loose panels in the ceiling. Darius allowed himself a moment of rare satisfaction, the kind that felt like a warm cloak against the usual chill of cosmic apathy. "Mostly?" Harquin asked, his skepticism as relentless as ever. Well, they still want surveillance, but it's more casual observer than paranoid stalker now, Kalia explained. And we get more resources, proper resources, even edible ones, Gus whooped, raising his cup in a toast to their unlikely allies. To aliens with a sense of humor, and to us for somehow pulling this off. Darius nodded, feeling the weight of the universe lift slightly from his shoulders. It's a start. We might even make something of this place. With the agreement confirmed, Gravitas began to transform. The miners, once hunched and worn down, started to walk a little taller. They worked with a new sense of purpose, as if daring the stars to challenge them. The first interspecies sports event took place soon after, a surreal blend of human moonball and an alien game that was vaguely reminiscent of synchronized swimming, minus the water and coordination. The aliens watched with what Darius hoped was bemusement and not plotting. The miners, invigorated by their small victory and the promise of more to come, turned their camaraderie into action. The ships and equipment, once held together by the rough equivalent of duct tape and dreams, began to function with a surprising level of efficiency. Darius walked through the bustling corridors of Gravitas, noting the changes with a mix of pride and disbelief. He found Harquin standing by the observation deck, staring out into the abyss. "Enjoying the view?" Darius asked, joining him by the glass. Harquin glanced over, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "More than usual. Guess I was wrong about this place. It's starting to grow on me." "Like a fungus," Darius quipped, earning a chuckle from his once skeptical companion. "But yeah, it's coming together." "Who'd have thought? Not me, that's for sure," Harquin admitted, his gaze returning to the stars. "But I'm glad it is. There's something to be said for defying odds." "Spoken like a true convert," Darius teased, clapping him on the back. "Welcome to the madhouse." They stood in companionable silence, watching the distant stars with a newfound sense of possibility. Gravitas, once a dim speck of insignificance, was on the rise. Back in the control room, Kalia was fiddling with the settings on the comm device, her mischievous nature never far from the surface. "You think they'll let us host the next interspecies convention here?" she mused aloud. "Only if you promise not to hack their systems in the process," Darius replied, having long since accepted her penchant for technological trickery. "No promises," she shot back with her trademark half-smirk, "but I'll try to behave." Gus wandered in, his cup, now filled with something slightly less lethal, raised in greeting. "Did I hear something about a convention? Can I bring the moonshine?" "Only if you want to start an intergalactic incident," Harquin replied, unable to resist the jab. "Who knew peace would be our biggest challenge?" Darius said, shaking his head in mock disbelief. The room erupted into laughter, the sound more familiar now than the silence that had once reigned. In this harsh corner of the universe, they had carved out a space for themselves, imperfect, gritty, but undeniably theirs. As the excitement of their newfound success began to settle, Darius gathered his crew. "All right, listen up," he said, his voice commanding their attention. "We've got a lot to do. More work, more games, and maybe even some cooperation with our alien friends. But let's not forget why we're here. To not get obliterated," Gus guessed, earning a round of chuckles. "To prove we belong," Darius corrected, though there was no edge to his voice. "To show that even in the darkest places, humans can find a way to shine." Kalia, ever the realist, added her own brand of optimism. "And to remind the universe that the punchline can be the best part of the joke." "Exactly," Darius said, the grin on his face as rare as it was genuine. "We've got a lot of work ahead, but if we can survive this, we can survive anything." With renewed vigor, they returned to their tasks, each step taken with the knowledge that they'd beaten the odds before and could do so again. Gravitas had become more than just a mining outpost. It was a testament to resilience, a defiant middle finger to the universe's cruel whims. The work continued, and so did the laughter. It echoed through the corridors, a beacon of irreverence in a galaxy that often took itself too seriously. And as Darius looked around at his crew, the people who had become his family, he knew that no matter what the future held, They'd face it together with the same stubborn tenacity that had brought them this far. In this tiny corner of space, hope had found a foothold. And as long as they had each other, the miners of Gravitas were ready to laugh in the face of whatever cosmic joke came next.